Good evening. It's roughly 7 o'clock. We'll call this meeting of the Montrose County Historical Society to order. As such, my name is Ken Huff. I'm the current president of the board of directors as well as the society. There you have it. All right. We came for this meeting, for this church. So I introduce to you Miss Barbara Kostelik, member of this church and presenter of this program. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Ken. My name is Barbara Kostelik, and I am on the board of directors of the Montrose County Historic Association, the Montrose County Historic Society. I've also been a member of this church for 49 years. I would like to thank at this point Steve Gray, who has helped me with this presentation. He's the one who's been responsible for all of the pictures. Steve Gray was born in Montrose. He left Montrose in 1947 with his family, and he returned to Montrose in 2005, bringing with him his lovely wife, Trish. And so between the two of us, we have a little bit of history with this church. The history of Montrose itself dovetails right into the history of the Methodism in Montrose. Montrose was incorporated as a community on May 2nd, 1882. And previous to that time, this little community had several names, including Dad's Town, Pomona, and Uncompahgre Town. Exactly 3 months later, in August, an event happened that is depicted in this watercolor by local artist Bob DiGiulio. In the year 2000, Bob DiGiulio was commissioned by the then pastor Steve Warren and his wife Beth to commemorate the placement of the Montrose United Methodist Church on the National Registry of Historical Places. This painting is titled, "Sunday, Go to Meeting." The beginnings of Methodism in Montrose were by three local women, Mrs. George Smith, Mrs. Charles Deal, and Mrs. William Wood. In 1882, Montrose was a typical Wild West town, and these women decided there needed to be some gentility. Gentility needs to be gentle. They need to have something other than the B&Bs, the bars and the brothels. And trust me, they had plenty of both. The three women cleaned the carpenter's shop on Saturday, set out nail kegs for seats, and the first Sunday school service was held on August 4th, 1882. The picture denotes a man bringing over an empty beer keg from the local saloon, and they had that for extra seating. A small boy was handing out flyers announcing the service, and Storm King Mountain is in the background. How appropriate for the Methodist community of faith to begin in a carpenter's shop. Soon, a local teacher and former minister from Ohio by the name of Linderman Wright was appointed by the Colorado Methodist Conference to serve as minister. The salary for he and his missionary wife was $100 a year. Some say they never received that salary. The following year, in 1883, the Methodist Episcopal Church of Montrose was formally organized. Services continued in the carpenter's shop from 1882 to 1884, with membership reaching as high as 40 plus and worship attendance reaching as high as 75. Discussions were being made about the need for a proper church to take place of the makeshift carpenter shop church. A neat church building meant civic and cultural growth and would indicate that the rough edges were beginning to be smoothed away. And on April 17, 1886, the cornerstone of the new Methodist Episcopal Church was laid at the corner of Cascade and North 2nd Street. The architectural style of most U.S. churches in the West was a simple square frame building, painted white, and topped with a steeple and a bell. However, the new church building in Montrose did not follow this pattern. Instead, it took on a brick L-shaped design with artistic high stained glass windows of a Gothic design. A steeple with louvered shutters arose from one corner, and above the entryway was a small stained glass window. At its completion, Montrose boasted a population of 1,000. There was a church enrollment of 210, with the average attendance being 101. Church attendance increased to the point that within a couple of years, a tent had to be erected in the back to accommodate the overflow. You can see the Methodist Episcopal Church as part of the city scene here. And in this panorama, you can see it, and I'm not too sure how well you can see it. I thought it was circled. It is right here. The building of the parsonage started in 1905. Much of the carpentry work was done by the then minister, Reverend Egerton. Up until recently, it was common and actually quite necessary to build a parsonage near the church. Salaries for preachers were quite meager, so to provide living arrangements was helpful to encourage new ministers and their families. Also, ministers usually took on multiple duties as minister, architect, custodian, security, and their wives were expected to be Sunday school teachers and musicians. This is the only known photo of the interior of that church on Cascade and North 2nd. And every time I do a program like this, I make a plea. If in your family photos you have an interior picture of this church from back in the early 1900s, please share it with the church as well as with the Historic Society. At the same time the parsonage was being constructed, the brick church was in an unfortunate state requiring much expensive repair work. Conversations began about building a new church, and at a church official board meeting, a motion was made and approved that a new structure was to be built. A Sunday school teacher by the name of Mrs. E. Boss gave the first $5 towards the cause, and 30 years later, the final $5 was paid. Unfortunately, Mrs. Boss had passed on by that time. In 1909, lots on the corner of South Park Avenue and First Street were purchased for $1,600. Discussions began on how large a new church should be, and the final conclusion was that it should be large enough to suffice for many years to come when the city had a population of 25,000. After viewing many plans for the new structure, the committee decided on a plan submitted by Thomas P. Barber of Colorado Springs. His design was a Romanesque revival style known as the Akron Plan. Even after the purchase of the lots on South Park and First Avenue, worship continued on the North 2nd Street Church until the very first city manager of Montrose, P.W. Pinkerton, announced that worship could no longer take place in that building until it was repaired. Even with the naked eye, he said, it was evident that that building was liable to fall down at any moment. This spurred the committee to abandon the old church and move forward with plans for the new church. In 1909, the Methodist Episcopals moved their worship to the Masonic Temple. The year 1909 was important to not only the Methodists, but to the entire farming and ranching community of Montrose. In September of that year, President Taft officially opened the Gunnison Tunnel, at that time considered the longest irrigation tunnel in the world, bringing water from the Gunnison River to the Uncompahgre Valley. President Taft called the Uncompahgre Valley the incomparable valley with the unpronounceable name. And the celebrations began in Montrose. I do not know when the groundbreaking of the basement area of the present church took place, but it was around the time that another quite interesting event took place in Montrose. It was not a huge event at that time, but has taken on some significance since then. During Fair Week of 1912, Jack Dempsey, who lived and trained in Montrose, had his first professional fight. Calling himself Kid Blackie, he defeated his good friend, Fred Wood. It was in 1915 that the basement area of the new church was completed and capped. The Methodist Episcopal worshipers then moved from the Masonic temple and conducted their worship service in the hole in the ground. 2 years after the worshipers moved into the hole in the ground, this cornerstone was laid and construction began in August of 1917 on the main floor and the upstairs of the church. The cornerstone was designed and created in Salida, Colorado, and was purchased, moved, and carried to Montrose for $34. Other events happening at that time, internationally, in Europe, the war to end all wars, World War I, had begun in 1914. Nationally, Woodrow Wilson was inaugurated in March for his second term of office after a close victory, with his slogan being, "He kept us out of war." In Colorado, Buffalo Bill Cody died, and locally, life continued as usual in the small farming ranching community. Until April. 1 month after Wilson was inaugurated, the U.S. did enter the war, and newspaper articles appeared about sons, husbands, and brothers volunteering for the service. There was information regarding the mandatory draft, and then there were articles of Montrosians who were injured or killed in the war. There were numerous construction delays of the new church, created not only by World War I, but also by the Spanish flu. In 1918, Montrose had a population of 3,500, and there were 922 cases of the Spanish flu, with 62 deaths. Statistically, the Spanish flu of 1918 was far more devastating in Montrose than COVID has been in the past couple of years. Many pastors had to get up from their own sick bed to bury the dead and to console the families. Finally, though, in mid-December of 1920, the main floor and balcony area of the church was completed. Earlier in 1920, the Ladies' Aid Society purchased the pipe organ, but not the first one to be purchased in Montrose. 2 years prior to the purchase of this pipe organ, the Congregational Church purchased their own, but sadly, a couple of weeks later, the entire church burned along with the organ. In the early years of last century, the Akron Plan, which our church is, was used in the design and construction of many U.S. churches. Here are 4 regional United Methodist churches with the same design. A church not shown, though, is our very near neighbor, the Delta United Methodist Church. Sunday, January 2nd, 1921, the first worship service in the newly built sanctuary was conducted by Reverend W.S. Grimm. Reverend Grimm had retired at the Methodist Episcopal Church, but had stayed on to supervise the final construction of the church. He designed the chancel and built the altar. He was thus given the honor of presiding over the very first worship service. The building and completion of this new church took on much interest in Montrose. After all, the entire community had watched the progress from around 1909 to 1921. So consequently, the Monday morning paper touted the celebrations of the previous evening with a huge headline and front page narrative. But there was a very interesting and little known sidelight. On the 3rd page was this headline: "Nurse locked in basement of Methodist Church." A nurse in attendance was given the message that she was to call St. Luke's Hospital, the name of the hospital in Montrose at that time. She retired to the basement where the only phone was to make her phone call. After the call, and while en route back to the sanctuary, the usher turned off all of the lights, locked the church. There were no lights for security. There was nothing. It was pitch black. After frantic moments trying to find her way back out of the church or her way back to the telephone in the dark, the usher finally realized what he had done and returned to the church and released the nurse. On Friday, January 7th, 1921, this was the formal opening of the church with Bishop Charles L. Meade of the Colorado Conference presiding. As part of his homily, Bishop Meade said, "The church, as an idealistic creation, stands for the finer things of life that cluster about the soul. People don't have to give money to build a church. They are taxed to build public buildings. The church is a voluntary contribution. Everything that you see in this church, from the pencils in the pew, to the pews themselves, to the flags, to the building, is here because somebody volunteered a donation." Now, down the street, there is a building that you are paying for through your taxes, and it's not voluntary. A fine church like this tells the tourists, the visitor, the traveling salesman, that there are people here who dream dreams, see visions, and have faith in themselves, in their fellow men, in their town, and in their God. I want you to look at the loft of the church in the 1920s. Check out the radiant heaters that we no longer have. That cross, I have no idea what ever happened to it. But that was the sanctuary choir loft in the 1920s. And this is the choir loft of the most present time, and the most recent time. And now I'm going to ask Connie to talk about the organ in the choir loft.
Am I on? Oh, he's so quick. Woo. I've been asked to talk about the organ a number of times, and since I've only been here 21 years, I needed some help with the history of it. And I asked around and got some good information and some totally inaccurate information. So it was interesting. I was told that this was the only pipe organ on the western slope. And I happened to be reading the Grand Junction paper one day, and they talked about 7 or 8 of them up there. And I thought, I don't think that's right. Anyway, the ones that I know of, there's quite a few in Grand Junction, but there's a small organ that I know of, and there may be another one in Cedar Edge. I was up there for a concert that the previous organist here gave, and it's a small organ, but it's a really good organ. And then the Delta Methodist Church has an organ just about exactly like this one. I played for a wedding up there some years ago, and I went, wow, I didn't have to change much of my stops or anything. But what had happened up there is they had a really bad fire, and they had to do a lot of repairs in the sanctuary, and they had to do a lot of repairs to the organ. So I'm assuming that the, let's see, does this say who? Yeah, the revision that was done here by W.E. Wilson and Associates from Colorado Springs in 1990, I'm assuming that same firm rebuilt the organ in Delta, because it's pretty much a mirror image of this one, which was nice for me when I had to play for a wedding. there's some interesting information, and some of you are familiar with organs in general, or in my case, pipe organs specifically. This particular organ has 2 manuals or 2 keyboards. There's the swell, that's the upper keyboard, and there's the grate, which is the lower keyboard, and there's the pedal board, which is got a lot of pedals. Some of the old organ, my grandfather started playing when he was 19 in the little Lutheran church in the middle of the sagebrush, in the same little settlement that I went to the one-room schoolhouse in. And he had, you remember the little short pedal boards that only had maybe 15, 16 keys, and that's what he had. And then he finally bought an organ with a full pedal board for himself. He played from age 19 until age 61, and then he retired. So I'm sorry, 81, and then he retired. So I've been thinking, I have a few years to go if I'm gonna do the same as my grandpa did. I'm not sure. He didn't have the kind of training that I've had, and he didn't have the kind of organ to play on, but he was quite a musician. This organ is a real thrill for me to play. I've done some work on pipe organs. I gave a concert on a pipe organ in Idaho Falls, where I lived for 16 years. And it was done for a local, well, it was a Mormon church, and it was a Mormon organization that asked me to play. And they had never heard what's on the organ are called the reeds. It's actually trumpets. In an orchestra, the reeds are the clarinet and the oboe and the bassoon. But on a pipe organ, the reeds are the brass, basically. And so I did, and I'm going to do one little short number tonight that's going to have brass in it, and it makes for a very big sound. And they were just, woo, we didn't know that organ could sound like that. You need to learn to use all the stops. Anyway, the pipes, by the way, behind me are fake. They're not the actual pipes. The actual pipes are up in 2 closets, and Barbara told me that they're going to open the closets tonight and have people up there to show you what's in them. I know that our longest pipe is 16 feet long. We don't have any 32-foot. Some pipe organs have 32-foot pipes, but our biggest is a 16. There's pipes in that closet, and there's pipes in that closet. The pipes in this closet, and I'll demonstrate a little bit when I get on the bench, are for the swell. When you play the organ, it doesn't matter how hard you strike the keys. The sound is the same. You don't get loud by striking them harder, and you don't get soft by striking them softer. Most of that is done with the stops. If you're going from loud to soft, you're going to have to push a button and change what your registration is. But the slight exception to that is the swell. The swell, we have kind of a volume pedal, and that it controls the volume on the swell. And the way it does that is up in this closet there are shutters, and I'm going to demonstrate the sound to you in a bit. But as you push down on that volume pedal, the shutters open. That's how the sound is enhanced on the swell. Other than changing stops, you actually have some control of the same stops by those shutters opening. But the grate is over there. The pipes for the grate are over there, and the only control is to change the stops. And the pipes for the pedals, I believe, are in both closets. I've only looked in this one, and I've seen the big, long pipes. But I think there's some on each side. We'll see when we go look. Let's see, what else did I want to tell? Oh, we have There's 61 keys on each manual, so there's 61 up there, 61 down there, 32 pedals, basically about 2.5 octaves of pedals. Playing the pedals is an interesting experience, and I used to be really good, but I'm getting old. Anyway, when you play the organ, you might have three lines of music, of notes. One of them sometimes for the upper manual, which is the swell, and then another set of notes for the lower manual, which is the great, and then another set of notes for the pedals. And the upper set might be 8th notes, and the lower set might be 16th notes, and the upper set might be going up, and the lower set might be going down, and then you have the pedals, and it's kind of a mind-blowing experience. I started learning when I was 19, and I'm still not as comfortable, relaxed, know that I'm going to do okay on the organ as I am on the piano. Of course, I started that when I was 4. So anyway, there are 9 ranks, which are a set of pipes for the whole keyboard. And we have ranks there are different families of pipes. There are the diapasons or the principals. Those are kind of the generic, works everywhere. And then there are the flutes. There's a whole family of flutes. And there are the reeds, which I talked about, the trumpets. And in this case, we have a little carillon or bells up here. So that's a little set of percussion stuff there. But there are 544 pipes to play in these closets to play all those various effects, you might say. And okay, that's another thing. The original organs, and when I was a kid, and it's still in our little Norwegian church up home, a reed organ, and I know an awful lot of you are familiar with reed organs. They were powered by pumping. It was like the old sewing machines that you had to pump the pedal to get the machine to sew. Well, that's what the reed organs were like. And I used to play that once in a while. In fact, I think it was the 75th anniversary of the church up there. I played the reed organ, and my aunt played the piano, and my grandpa played the church organ. But the reed organ really had a pretty good sound, but boy, it was hard work. And then as they developed the big organs like this, they powered the air, because it's air that it's going through the pipes, and that's what's making the sound. They had bellows, and they used to have young kids back behind the organ, just like you're getting the fire to get burning good. That's what they did for the whole service. We don't have to do that anymore. We have electronics. The actual organ was invented in the 3rd century, and it was a small handheld organ. And then the larger organs became common, and they were not portable, of course, any more than this one is. And J.S. Bach was the big organ guy. I play a lot of Bach. I love his music. And but tonight I'm going to play just one little quick piece. It's written by Flor Peters, and his real name is Franciscus Florentinus Peters, and he was Belgium. The only other Belgium native that I know of is Hercule Poirot from the good PBS Agatha Christie stories. Anyway, he was a Belgian composer, an organist, an academic teacher, director of the Conservatorium in Antwerp. He was born in 1903 and lived till 1986. He was the organist at Mechelen Cathedral from 1923 to 1986. This is a very, very short piece, but it's powerful, and I love to play it. So it's called Holy God, We Praise Thy Name. It's a familiar hymn to most of us. I was going to sing a little bit of it, but probably not. But anyway, the melody is in the pedals. So when you're listening for da 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 dum, listen in the pedals, because the hands are doing all this fast stuff and the pedals are doing the melody slowly. I did want to read you the words, the first verse of this hymn. Holy God, we praise thy name. Lord of all, we bow before thee. All on earth thy scepter claims, all in heaven above adore thee. Infinite thy vast domain, everlasting is thy reign.
Thank you, Connie. I don't know if I introduced her last name or not. That's Connie Stout. She's one of the organists at the church, along with Kelly Thompson. Thank you so much. That was very interesting. We're now going to return back to the 1920s when the organ was first purchased. And this is the Sunday school class in the 1920s. I think it would be the envy of any church in Montrose today. Look at all of those kiddos attending Sunday school. Now, this was before swim meets, football games, soccer matches, ski trips to Telluride. So on the weekend, church was the important event. This little church was the Uncompahgre Church, and it was a few blocks from the old Uncompahgre School, which is now a B&B. And it was on Highway 550. Steve Gray's grandparents and father attended the ceremony to merge the two churches. This scene was part of a fundraiser where we had some note cards with this particular scene. And it clearly shows the theater-style seats. Now, what was interesting when we had those theater-style seats, there was no center aisle. We had a group of seats here, we had a group of seats here, and we had a group of seats here. Made weddings a little bit complicated. The original church parsonage was built in 1941 and was an old frame structure that required much maintenance and repair. In 1951, the church leadership had three choices: repair the existing parsonage for $1,900, trade the existing parsonage in for another building at a cost of $5,000, or build a 3-bedroom home with a full basement for $12,321. This is the block on First Street after that parsonage was built. And I'm going to go from the church on over. Here is the parsonage. This little house here, I don't know when the second house came into possession of the church, but while the parsonage was being built, the pastor and his family temporarily lived in that house. Since it was a brick house, it was torn down shortly thereafter and is now where our playground is. This third house here was the home of Mary Kaufman. The church purchased the house from the Kaufman family in January of 2019. The church sold the house this year and has been moved off the block to its new location on South 7th and Nevada Street. This last house here was used as the parsonage for an associate pastor in the early mid-'80s. After that, it was rented out and became income producing for the church. In the late 90s, the house became the youth house, where they could have their worship gatherings, they had their youth meetings, they had their after-school homework get-togethers, and a computer lab. After a few years, though, it became apparent that the house, especially the second floor, was no longer safe and was in danger of collapsing. The house was torn down, and some of the bricks, as well as the staircase, are now in the Museum of the Mountain West in their hotel. The lot for the past several years was turned into a community garden, and the land from the sidewalk to the street was turned into a parking lot with 11 spaces thanks to the United Methodist Men. Now, Methodists have always been pretty big on recycling, and this is the parsonage that we recycled. It was sold in 1994 for a building expansion, and you can see it today located on South 2nd Street. To continue the recycling, the Kaufman House is en route from this location to its new location on South 7th and Nevada. This is the church with the parsonage in view, and this is pretty much what the church and the block looked like when I moved here with my husband in 1973. This is pretty much what the worship service looked like at the same time. This is the sanctuary in the 1960s. Note, all the men are in suits and ties. Women are wearing dresses, hats, probably gloves, and the children are also dressed in suits and ties and dresses. This is Park Avenue Hall, which is directly downstairs from the sanctuary, and this was the fellowship hall where all the church gatherings happened. Using the portable walls, and you can see those right here and here. The portable walls were made with a wood framing with fabric to make them lightweight, and using those, the room could be divided in for a couple of classrooms. Needless to say, they were hardly soundproof. This is an event of the past. This was a Boy Scout Sunday. I can remember when I was in Girl Scouts that we would have Girl Scout Sunday where we would go from each year from one church to another, and that's the way we learned about other congregations. Okay. This is pretty much what the sanctuary looked like when I moved here. And I want to talk about this wall and this part right up here. Behind the wall is an elongated room that was turned into a library and a meeting room. Above that room and up here on the third floor, that same space was walled off on both the interior and exterior, and there was no way to access that room. These two spaces are a huge mystery to me, and I would like, before I pass on, to have that mystery solved. The Akron style of sanctuaries usually had balconies going all the way across, and so the balcony would have extended into this area. The balcony would have been a kind of a horseshoe shape. They also often had classrooms extending off of the back of the balcony. We don't here, of course, but behind this space on the third floor are 4 classrooms. Someplace along the line, and I don't know if it was during the initial construction of the church or a little bit later on, this wall, which is on a pulley system, was installed so that that wall could go up and down. Well, when it goes up into this area, which would be the balcony. So sometime, and again, I don't know if it was during the construction or sometime afterwards, that balcony area was walled off so that this wall could be extended up there. Now, the pulleys didn't last very long. I have never seen that wall up. The whole mechanism collapsed someplace along the line. And I think I said that once that wall was permanently down, behind it was where we had a library and classrooms and a meeting room. About the same time the community was reveling in the centennial celebration of their incorporation, the Methodists were in serious discussion about the future of the building. Big changes were considered and made. There were several issues. The earliest discussion question to be considered was whether or not to abandon the church completely and build south of town. The congregation had absolutely outgrown the building. The 11 o'clock church service was so crowded that the then pastor, Reverend Claire Mitchell, created a golf and gardening service. He advertised it as an early service where you could come in your golf and gardening clothes and immediately leave and go about the rest of your day. Well, that service got so popular, it was held at 8:30, and it got so popular that they had to move it from a downstairs classroom to the fellowship room downstairs. And eventually then, we outgrew that and we moved it upstairs, and that became what is now our first service. And that was also kind of the beginning when Methodists started dressing a little bit more casually for worship. During that time, Sunday school classes met in the tower room, which is directly behind Steve, in the pastor's office, in the alcove of the sanctuary, which is right over there. That's where my adult class was. In the library, and every nook and cranny they could find. One adult class actually left the church entirely on Sunday morning and met in the little restaurant across the street called the Cameo. The Cameo is the little yellow building behind the hardware store on Main Street. Their class became known as the Cameo Club. The congregation demanded they wanted to remain as a downtown church. But if that was going to happen, many changes needed to be made, and they did happen in 2 stages. In 1984, the first stage began to renovate the existing church building, both inside and outside. Look at this picture and check out the entrances. There is absolutely no way to get into this church without climbing stairs. At the same time we were making these discussions, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, was being discussed and finally passed in 1990. As a church, it was exempt from the ADA, but the church leadership did feel an obligation, and so outside ramps were constructed for entrance to both the downstairs and to the sanctuary. This is what the sanctuary looked like before. And this is what the sanctuary looked like after. Numerous changes were made inside. The basement and kitchen was cut in half, leaving space for restrooms and showers. The nursery and preschool classrooms were turned into a library and a music room. The music room has since been turned into a kids' aid room that stores food sources for children going home on the weekend, and no school breakfast or services would be provided. On the main floor, classrooms were turned into offices, and numerous changes were made in the sanctuary. The wall separating the library and the sanctuary was removed, creating a stage with folding doors, and you can see those here and here. And those doors could be opened or shut depending on sanctuary needs. The upper floor was converted the 4 small classrooms into 2 large classrooms, and the walled off portion above the stage was opened up, and it's currently being used as a youth game room. The opening up of that space above the stage created even more speculation about the balcony. It had long been suspected that the balcony and railing had extended to this side of our room. When the room above the stage was opened up, it had the same color carpeting as the balcony. Why would a closed up space be carpeted? Also fueling the speculation is the Delta Church. It does have a balcony area over the stage area. So I'm not going to die until I learn the mystery of this. I shall live forever. Now it was time for the second stage for the church, the building of the addition. The church already had a sizable amount of money for construction. Monies had been saved and invested over the years with expansion in mind, and church-owned properties were sold. But the church was still short to cover the final cost of the project. On April 22nd of 1990, this was Miracle Sunday, and it was held at the high school cafeteria, known at that time as the Redskin Inn. Beginning at 9 o'clock and ending at noon, there was a breakfast, a program, and a worship service. On that one Sunday, over $500,000 was raised through cash donations and pledges, and construction soon began using building plans from church member and architect Patrick Davis. The main floor has a large fellowship area, storage closets, and a substantial commercial kitchen following health department guidelines and regulations. The downstairs was very carefully designed to follow guidelines for a preschool and daycare facility. The church qualified in 2000, but guidelines have changed to the point that it no longer qualifies. The downstairs has 4 primary and preschool classrooms. 3 regular-sized rooms can be opened up to 1 large room due to movable walls. In addition to the classrooms, there is a nursery, a child-sized restroom, storage closet, and 2 office spaces. A 3-floor lift, which is right around this corner, can take individuals from the street level to either downstairs to the basement or upstairs to the main floor. The entire project was just shy $1 million, and the church did not have to take out a loan for its completion. The church is very proud to claim that today it is debt-free. Well, we couldn't just keep calling it the new addition. So the leaders of the church got together and they gave the new addition the name of Baldridge Hall after Cliff Baldridge, who was a church and community entrepreneur. In 2011, it was about this time that the Board of Trustees realized that even though the outside of the church was handicapped accessible, much of the interior, including the sanctuary, which is the heart of the church, was not. You can see everything has steps. There was a huge step from the stage to go up here. There's a door back here that you can't see, that there's a step to get into the choir area. Everything required steps. If the church had a handicapped minister, he or she would not have been able to get to the pulpit. So, major renovations began in 2013, and just like all of your personal home projects start to grow and expand, so did this. As soon as the floor of the chancel area was looked at, it was apparent that it dovetailed into issues of the downstairs kitchen. And so one major project became two, and the kitchen downstairs was also renovated and is now certified by the health department as a commercial kitchen. And now you can see the sanctuary after all of the renovations. You can see that we have a smooth entrance up to the altar area. We have this ramp here where we can move our clavinovas off the stage. I think we could probably move the organ if we wanted to. I don't think we ever would want to. I'm not too sure the piano would move. And so it's much more handicap accessible. As the interior was being upgraded, there were exterior issues as well, especially the roof and the steps. At the same time, discussions were being made to repair the roof and the steps. The Board of Trustees thought this would be a good time to change the outside front entrance cosmetically to make the church look more like it did in 1921 before the upgrades. This is how it was. By the way, that's my car there, if anybody's interested. We had the sign here, and it just didn't look anything the way it did before. After we did the renovations, the sign was moved, and it's a much cleaner frontage with, of course, hand railings, which the initial church did not have. And that's what the initial church looked like in 1921. The history of the Montrose United Methodist Church is still being written. As you can guess, a building over 100 years old does develop some structural issues, and they are currently being looked at. Thank you. And they are currently being looked at and evaluated. The members want this beautiful building to have many more useful years. There are also discussions being held on how to utilize a stretch of land from the church building to Mesa Avenue, so stay tuned. At this point, we haven't made any decisions. On behalf of the Montrose County Historic Society and the Montrose United Methodist Church and members, I thank you for coming this evening to participate in the history of this grand old building. I will entertain questions and then invite you to tour the church, especially the upstairs, where you may view the pipes that make the sweet music as the organist presses each key with either a foot or a finger.